Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
When I was in the church, this whole idea of evolution was kind of presented like a kind of cartoon, right? From goo to the zoo to you. That's how it was sort of proposed. This was also, in many ways, a threat to our specialness. If we are evolved creatures by a universe that isn't really too concerned about us, then we're not hand-selected children of a cosmic king. And of course, coming out of all that, learning about the facts of evolution hasn't cheated my sense of awe or self-worth. In fact, more every day, I'm just astounded at how life here began its countless expressions via evolution. And that's really the kind of awe that you get watching Dr. Robert Hazen's lecture series at the Great Courses Plus called The Origin and Evolution of Earth, from the Big Bang to the Future of Human Existence. From the minerals in our soil to the stars in the cosmos, we are witnesses to evolution, life adapting, diversifying, reproducing, and this includes us higher primates. I just want to encourage you to check out The Origin and Evolution of Earth at the Great Courses Plus. It's just one of thousands of lectures on so many diverse subjects taught by the best instructors in the world. And right now, you can unlock this world of knowledge with a free trial and unlimited access to their entire library via my special URL. So start your free trial today. Sign up at thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. More and more is I'm an activist. I am interested in intentions. Like, what drives people? What causes people to do the things they do? There's a culture of folks out there, they only care about the results. Like, I don't care what they think. I don't care how they got there. I just care that they are harming people. And I'm going to go out there and I'm going to deal with the actions and not the intentions. Well, I think the actions do have to be dealt with, but isn't it important to try to find out what drives people? How did they get there? What influenced them? How might they be influenced out of bad ideas and toward better ideas? I just finished a documentary by Ken Burns. It's available on Netflix. It originally released on PBS, I guess, a few years ago. The Vietnam War. It's a 10-part documentary. Now, I love Ken Burns. The Civil War, which was his documentary of 20-some years ago, is perhaps my favorite documentary series of all time. It just brought the Civil War to life in 3 bloody dimensions, and it just drew you into this very dark chapter in American history in a way that I'd never seen before. I think it should be required viewing in schools. That's how good it is. And so I'm sort of scrolling through, seeing some of the other Ken Burns options. You know, there's baseball. I'm not necessarily interested in that documentary. The Dust Bowl, I couldn't get excited about starting that one. And then I saw the Vietnam War, and I clicked play on the first episode. And before you know it, I'm hooked. I'm watching it all the way through. It's like, it must be close to 20 hours, 15 to 20 hours of content. Really well-produced content. And I walked away with some observations, and I do have a point here, okay? I have a point. The first was, I am struck by how oblivious the United States was in regard to what we were fighting for and against. We had bought into the Red Scare, right? Communism is kind of de facto Satanism, and it's spreading out of China, and it's spreading throughout all of these countries overseas, and one day it's going to come here and threaten our freedom in the United States. It's threatening our allies as we speak. We must go and do battle in Vietnam. We must help the South Vietnamese against the communist North Vietnamese. But we culturally were totally ignorant about what drove the North Vietnamese. We were oblivious to the fact that they had seen the French as interlopers and occupiers before. They had spent 100 years under huge oppression under French rule, and they saw the United States as just another occupier. They were willing to die to the last man and woman, not to surrender, right? No matter what the costs were, no matter what the body count was, they weren't going to wave the white flag. Now, remember that the United States was gauging its successes based on body count. It wasn't about land. Like, we'd take a hill and then we'd leave the hill. We'd take a tract of land, we'd kill everything on it, and then we'd leave. We'd just walk away from it, because the measure of success for the United States was how many NVA were killed, thinking at one point they're going to suffer so many losses they'll become demoralized and they will simply surrender. But if you have a culture of people who has already committed themselves to never surrender, to never again be occupied or under the boot of some interloping nation, if you understand that, then you realize at the front end that your very notions of success, your measuring stick for victory, fails before the war even began. But we committed against the advice of our allies, against the advice of many here inside the borders of the United States. We jumped in, and 10 years of bloodshed result in over 55,000 Americans dead, and I think 1.5 to 2 million North and South Vietnamese killed as well. Senseless slaughter, rooted in ignorance about the situation, the people, what they thought, why they thought it. Lost in a fog of our own ignorance and fear, we literally pulled the trigger. We saw them as the other, the encroaching evil. We had no cultural backstory. We had no idea how their mental processes were working, how they were approaching the war, why they were fighting. We just saw them as the other that had to be defeated. And as a result, 10 long years of senseless bloodshed took place and conflict took place. And at the very end, what was accomplished? Well, it's interesting to watch many of the soldiers interviewed for the documentary as they talk about their own change of mindset, as they themselves began to better understand the reality of what was going on. The politicians have the puppet strings, but it was the soldiers, right? The boots on the ground. And they began to see that all is not as it seems. All of the talk about defeating the evil, defeating the Reds, defeating the NVA, those were not tethered to reality. They saw brave enemy soldiers who thrust themselves into conflicts they knew they likely weren't going to survive, and yet they did it anyway, and came away in many instances with a tremendous respect for the soldiers on the other side of the line. More and more we saw the Vietnam War is kind of a microcosm of the larger class war. It wasn't the rich kids who had power and influence and friends in high places who were being sent off to die in battle, right? It was usually people of lesser means, often people who were not white, people who weren't able to play the privilege card. Well, they were drafted first and they usually died first. And so you see soldiers who are interviewed in these amazingly sort of intimate settings. I mean, the camera's right up on them, and they were talking about when they came back, having the knowledge they had about what they'd seen in the field, seeing the United States operating in the way that it was operating, watching the growing numbers of protests all around the country, and deciding in their own lives that they must also become a war protester. And for this, despite their service, despite the fact that many of them survived horrible, life-altering wounds, despite the fact that they had paid their dues and earned the right to say pretty much whatever they wanted to say, they were called traitors. You're not standing shoulder to shoulder with the decisions made by Johnson, McNamara, Nixon, etc. Therefore, since you're saying something in criticism about your country, where you live, the country that has given you your freedom, that kind of talk, you are no longer a patriot. You are now an enemy of the United States. These false narratives about criticism were selling that lie. And you see these guys who had paid their dues, and they're standing out in the middle of the Lincoln Memorial, at the White House, in major protests organized all around the country, saying, this has to stop. The death and mayhem has to stop. The oppression has to stop. The whole charade has to stop now. And they grab the medals that they were awarded for valor and bravery and combat, and they throw them over the walls. They throw them at the White House. They throw them at the halls of power and say, we want none of this. In the eyes of a whole lot of people, it just seemed like the ultimate betrayal. The ultimate betrayal. How could you do that? Your Medal of Honor, your Distinguished Flying Cross, your Purple Hearts, you just threw them away. It's like you're throwing your whole country away. When I was younger and much more naive, I think I would have felt the same. I think I did feel kind of the same way. I didn't really understand Vietnam. I just thought, wow, the war protesters during a time of war, we should be standing with our country in these moments of crisis. I felt the same way during the first Iraq war back in the early 1990s, right, when we went into Kuwait, actually, not Iraq. And I was like, yeah, we had that sort of faux patriotism where we thought no matter what happens, we stand with America. And it was only later, of course, when I grew up a little bit and I began to see that patriotism is not the same as blind nationalism, and standing blindly allegiant when your country, when the nation that represents you is doing something that is politically, strategically, morally wrong, that's not patriotism. It's actually a betrayal of what a genuinely good nation stands for. Now, I love this country, not because I was born here, but because I do love the ideas that, at least in theory, it represents despite all of its problems. But if I see the nation doing something damaging or untoward, and I protest against it, as I often do with Donald J. Trump, am I treasonous? Have I betrayed my country? Am I un-American? This is the narrative that we often see. Some people reject the idea of patriotism outright. They think it's ridiculous and stupid to love your country, especially if it means that, you are preferential in your treatment or your attitudes about that country. I think there's some merit to that. I mean, we think about the borderlines of the nations of the world. They're all subjectively drawn by human beings. I also know how frustrating it is to see how patriotism is trussed up. I mean, all you have to do is look at the color palette of all the branding on Fox News. What are the colors? Red, white, blue, right? It's America, America, America. And being from Oklahoma, a red state that has a lot of this sort of God and country stuff, a lot of flag waving and chest thumping and these sort of saccharine versions of patriotism. I get the resistance to it. But, I was talking to Sarah Levin at the Secular Coalition for America. I'm going to release a series of videos with her later on this month. And she talks about patriotism and how it's a word that's been contaminated. It's an idea that's been contaminated. It's okay to love your country. It's okay to love your country. It doesn't mean that you love another country less. It doesn't mean that you think you're better than other people, but you can appreciate and love the country that you live in without being a blind nationalist. And I agree with Sarah on this. But I also think that if you genuinely love your country and you see something wrong, the patriotic thing to do is to stand up and criticize it. This is not popular among many quote-unquote American patriots. So I'd be curious to hear your perspectives on the issues of patriotism and protest. And we can open the phones wide up and talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. That's just one of the topics that I've tossed out for discussion today. But we'll let the listeners decide what else we speak about. Now that I've monologued for about, a dozen minutes, let me finally get to the switchboard. We'll go to the phones and see what our callers have to say. 512, you're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who's this?
Hi, this is Chris in Austin, Texas.
What's going on, Chris?
Well, I'm going to start off with saying I'm not trying to ask for parenting advice, but it kind of is. I know that I'm kind of fortunate as far as being in the South. Like, Austin's not as bad as some places as it could be, but my son, who's just turning 5, and he's already having questions of like a kid was singing Knick Knack Paddywhack, right? And it's 5, 6, he goes to heaven, and he's like, well, Daddy, what's heaven? And he has some friends that, I guess the give a little background. I'm kind of a staunchy atheist myself. Like on Sundays, I'm actually an atheist T-shirt I wear, publicly on Sundays, and we're missing out on hanging out with some child friends because of my beliefs, and I don't know how to explain to him like their stances versus mine, and how to answer his questions without giving him bias. And I figured I'd give you a call because you're one of the great atheist thinkers, right? That's accessible.
Whatever. My solution is to recommend a book. I know it sounds like a cop-out, but I love the man. He is brilliant. He is kind. He is crazy smart. His name is Dale McGowan. McGowan. Dale McGowan. He's written a book that I looked up while you were speaking to make sure I get the title right. You can get it on Amazon or anywhere. It's called Parenting Beyond Belief. Parenting Beyond Belief on Raising Ethical, Caring Kids Without Religion. And he gets into, how do we not indoctrinate our kids? How do we allow them to sort of carve their own path while also teaching them what they need to know to get through life, the difference between what to think and how to think, and how to deal with the rest of their lives. It's really good stuff. Parenting Beyond Belief, Dale McGowan. Check it out. I think that is probably the first step in your journey. He's much wiser than I am on the subject, okay?
All right, definitely. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you. Area code 813. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who's this?
Ralph from Tampa, Florida.
Ralph, what's up, man?
I just wanted to tell you something, that I'm 57 years old, but when I was 50s, when I finally admitted to myself and came out as an atheist. It's interesting. I've come out twice in my life, once as a gay man when I was 21, and then as an atheist. But it took me a while to accept that. I mean, I even went to the Episcopal Church for about a year and a half before I finally said, why am I here? I don't agree with this. And I didn't agree. Since I was young, I never did agree with religion. To me, nothing made sense. Science did. So anyway, I want to ask you something. Since obviously you were involved with religion big time, what is it with religious people and hypocrisy? I mean, there's so many hypocrites, and I'm not saying all, but it just seems like there's so many. What's your take on that?
I think they're human beings, and hypocrisy is rampant among human beings. I see hypocrisy on the right. I see hypocrisy on the left. I see hypocrisy in different churches and political parties and cultures. One phenomenon
it's everywhere, in other words,
that I have noticed, though, is you will find people who, in religion, will project outwardly what they wish they were, while hiding what they really are. And
in other words, not dealing with the problems or emotional issues they're going through. They're not dealing with the problems, but they're hiding it under religion.
I think sometimes they're self-conscious. Maybe under the surface, it's always there. It's like the pastor that's always preaching about homosexuality, railing on it every single Sunday and pounding the pulpit and all those types of things. And then what are the chances that pastor is struggling with his own sexual identity? And so one way to compensate is to continue to preach out against it and to try to affirm God's word. And so while he's preaching verbally outward to the congregation, I think in many instances you will find that they are struggling with their own sexual identity.
But
how many Ted Haggards of the world have we seen who were like, it's wrong to be gay, it's wrong to be gay, it's wrong to be gay. And then before you know it, the guy's busted, right? So...
Yeah, I know. And I've seen that happen too. I just wanted to tell you something. I discovered Hemen Mehta on YouTube, and it was a breath of fresh air because I thought, wow, at least I'm not alone. And I was able to see a lot of his videos. And then I discovered you by mistake, just sort of scanning through, not by mistake, just scrolling through. And then there, Beth Andrews, I said, let me check this out. And let me tell you, listening to your podcast has been a big breath of fresh air.
Thank you.
I've loved every single one of your shows that you put on the air.
Thank you for that. I hope the show's been beneficial in your journey, my friend.
Oh, it has. And over the years now, I found that when I came out, only one friend didn't want to talk to me after I told her I didn't believe in God. But for the rest of my friends are fine with it. They're like, okay, you have the right to.
Yeah.
And one friend even jokingly said, okay, well, when you sneeze, I won't say God bless you.
I don't get hung up on that stuff. I'm sure you don't either. But I do know some people that do,
Well, my partner who does believe, but he's fine with it. He just says, I hope I don't offend you when you leave for work. Sometimes I say, God be with you. I said, no, well, you know what? It's nothing wrong. You don't mean any harm. He says, I know you're an atheist. Just that sometimes I forget and I just say, may God be with you. So that's okay.
He says that to people?
Not done maliciously. He says it to me.
Does he say it to everybody? I mean, God be with you?
No.
That sounds a little sketchy. That sounds like you're being casually targeted for God's blessing. I'm just saying.
Maybe, whatever. But he doesn't say it every day, but just sometimes, and I don't take it that way. I just say, okay, whatever.
Well, I think back to the original comment about hypocrisy. I think there are always the pious where they say, we shouldn't gossip, but let me tell you about so-and-so just down the street. You know what they did the other day? I mean, it is rampant in the church. And I think one of the reasons that it's so easy to spot in the church is because the church has so many rules that are so easy to break or natural to break because they are by nature restrictive. So when you see people who are doing what they really want to do, while on the other side speaking against what they shouldn't be doing, I think it becomes much more apparent to the rest of us. Their lives are a list of do's and don'ts, and there are a shit ton of don'ts. And when they finally breathe and relax and do what they really want to do, well, then the hypocrisy is there in bright sunlight for all of us to see,
I know, and I just want to end it on this little interesting note. When I was in my 20s, I was with this one guy. We were living together for 5 months. And he was an Episcopalian and, always went to church every Sunday and prayed before every meal. But he was one of the most bigoted people I've ever was with. I mean, talk about living with an Archie Bunker. That's exactly what I lived with for 5 months, and I couldn't take it. Every day was a comment about somebody.
Yeah.
And then one time he made a comment about the dirty Latinos and said, hey, in case you haven't forgotten, I am Mexican-American. So watch that. I had to put my foot down. I don't know how you can put up with it 5 months. But finally, after 5 months, I said, I can't take this anymore.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah. Too much. Well,
I just want to add that little note there.
All right. Fair enough, man. Appreciate it.
No problem. Keep up the good job.
All right. Take it easy. Area code 919. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who's this?
This is Logan.
Logan, what's on your mind, my friend?
As a former service member, I'm actually retired after 14 years of service. Compulsory patriotism is something that just gets under my skin. Seeing it weaponized like that for political means is just disconcerting. The biggest one is the kneeling for the national anthem. Like, I don't agree with it. I won't do it. But to say that you have to stand for it, that you have to show respect, that's an antithesis to what we should be as a country.
Yeah, the narrative is if you take a knee for silent and respectful protests that you are betraying. And they like to play the military service here, don't they? They like to say that you're betraying all the people who fought and died for our freedoms.
While denying a freedom. It's very ironic.
So may I ask what branch of the military? You may have said it and I missed it.
No, I didn't. Air Force.
Air Force. So very much a God and country kind of a culture, right? I mean,
yes, there is a large evangelical contingent amongst our officer corps.
Do you have like a lot of God speak in the things that you do? Do they invoke God at all?
Not on a regular basis, but I have been in a number of combat-based briefings where it was ended by the commander saying, "Larry, now let's get out there and do God's work." We're talking about bombing people in other countries and things like that, and that's what he ends on. It's like, oh, that's not good. And so, like, my time in service, like, if someone wants to take out a flag and burn it, then they are buying that material and burning it in a fashion that is their property to burn. I wouldn't do it. I don't agree with it, but I can't say that person should be arrested, fined, or otherwise because of it. So it's just infuriating that people can't get to that next step.
Now, could you say that to your fellow servicemen and women in the Air Force and they get it, or were you isolated in your opinion?
It's a mixed bag. It's a lot like any other part of the world, but I've worked with people who are Muslim and Hindu and so forth. So there are a lot of different religions, and the younger section of the service tends to be a lot lighter on the religion.
What about patriotism in general? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't mind patriotism as a whole. I just don't like the compulsory one. If you want to be proud of your country and you think we're doing some really good stuff, or you think that we have done some amazing things, we should be proud of that. That's awesome. But to say that you have to be proud of the country and deny anything that's not, it starts to run into a thought control process that I can't agree with.
All right, man. Thanks for the input. Thanks for being a part of the show.
You're welcome.
Funny how you change your mind on certain things as you grow up. When I was growing up, it just made sense. You stand and pledge an allegiance. And now I look back and I'm like this sort of rote recitation where we say, I pledge allegiance to the flag. It's like a blind allegiance. I wish the pledge itself was more about a pledge toward truth and goodness. And yes, I am more of a globalist these days. And I don't understand how many people that are in my direct vicinity take so much pride in what is essentially an accident of birth. I'm American. I was born here, raised here, I am. And I'm like, well, yes, this is an accident of birth. I'm not saying anything about the merits of or the goodness of, and I believe there's a lot of goodness in this free country. I get that. A lot of problems, but I also understand that we're pretty spoiled here in this first world environment. But, for them to say, well, I was born here. I was born on this soil. It's like it's holy ground. And I'm like, this is an accident of birth. You could have been born anywhere. It's like, taking pride in having brown hair or green eyes. I've got Max on the switchboard. Max, thanks for calling. And what's on your mind?
When I was first coming out of the church, I was kind of confused how to feel about it because I had been in rigid fundamental circles. And Christopher Hitchens' patriotic stance really melds with my point of view now. And I kind of find myself troubled. I'm more independent and moderate. And I often find the left is very willing to protest the country over issues of systemic racism in police force or things like that. And I am troubled by that. Meaning I'm troubled by somebody kneeling at the flag, to be honest with you, because I think even if America has its issues, which it does, we were one of the first countries to really throw that Bill of Rights out there, and we're still one of the freest countries on earth. And I think it's almost like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, you see other countries like Canada having laws against free speech, and I think we need to be a little bit more grateful about it. And I like how when Islam, was taking stances against America, you have Christopher Hitchens, one of the great atheists, that says, you know what, America's got its issues, and he stood with it. And I don't know, he gave me a perspective of a liberal atheist on it, and I kind of find it lacking in the extremism we see today.
Well, I appreciate the call very much, my friend. Thank you.
But
I've got Holly on the switchboard. Holly, you are on the Thinking Atheist podcast. What's going on?
Hi, Seth. How are you?
I'm well. What's on your mind?
Good, good. Well, I'm newly atheist, been so for about 6 months, and kind of having a hard time adjusting to my new belief system. Raised evangelical Christian, but have kind of leaned more towards like a new thoughts, mystic Christianity mindset for several years. So if you're familiar with like Wayne Dyer and people like that, that's kind of where my belief system has been rooted for so long. And in dealing with, life struggles and challenges, old habits like prayer and believing that God is in control, and stuff like that, things that I know are no longer serving me are also very deep-seated, kind of in my psyche and hard to let go of, when I've held on to them for so long. And I know that things like meditation and taking walks and listening to non-Christian uplifting music can probably be alternatives to some of those old habits, but just kind of employing and implementing some of those new tools I found to be kind of challenging because, I kind of wanted to just kind of fall back into my old mindsets and my old habits, which I know are no longer serving me, obviously.
There's a lot to unpack here, Holly. There's a lot that you have given us to unpack, okay? So let's start unpacking just a little bit.
Okay.
What caused the drift out of fundamentalism?
Just being exposed to other belief systems, other worldviews, learning about other religions that were very similar to Christianity, yet older. And then, from there, I was exposed to, like James Randi and Michael Shermer and Penn Jillette and all those folks, and they were also exposing me to other worldviews, such as atheism, which took me, it was a very long road to get to atheism. I wasn't, immediately an atheist upon being exposed to, those guys. It was kind of more of just a kind of trial and error and picking the things that I liked out of different worldviews and kind of making my own stuff from the Bible and from, the Bhagavad Gita and stuff, and just not take it as literal, but take it more as analogical, if that makes any sense. Like, this is what they're trying to say, and this is how you can apply it to your own life.
Couple of things. First of all, you are obviously well aware of your own constructing of a belief system based on kind of a cafeteria, right? You went over here and you're like, this is delicious. I'd like some of that. And you went over to this religion and said, that's delicious. I'll take some of that. Oh, I don't like this. I'll reject that. So you are now sort of subjectively selecting which ones you personally like the best. Would we agree that's how it happened?
Yeah, more or less.
All right. Secondly, and when you said atheist and worldview in the same sentence, I have to pause. Now, this is something that you and I are taught whenever we come out of. Everything's a worldview when you come out of a religious culture. But if we're to be honest, atheism is simply the lack of a belief in God. It's saying, I'm not convinced of your God claim. It doesn't speak to a worldview. It doesn't determine that we necessarily live this way or think this way or vote this way or do whatever, that we're good people, bad people, in-between people. It just means we reject a belief in God. So I'd like you to start by not seeing atheism as kind of a worldview that you've adopted in place of religion. We just walked away from religion, right? We have decided I don't buy that. But your lack of a belief in God doesn't dictate that you are a believer in something else that would replace it in a God model. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely fair. And I think that's part of where my struggle is because, up until now, I have had a belief that, when something went awry in my life, that I could fall back on this deity that I supposedly believed in for so long and say, oh, God's in control and he's got this whole thing, and I could rely on that. And now I don't have that any longer.
I was talking to Gail Jordan at Recovering from Religion, and she spoke the truth when she talked about there is, for many people, not all, but for many people, there's a kind of a grieving process because you're walking away from a model that gave you comfort, and it's attractive to a great many people, right? God is in control. This assures us.
Absolutely.
When I die, I'll be reunited with those that I grieved in this life. Will one day be together again. That's attractive. The place to go, drop to your knees and put your hands together, close your eyes and call out to someone with the belief that they are listening and they actually care. That's attractive to a lot of people. And you can speak to that, right?
Absolutely.
Do you feel like in the absence of that, there's a void in your life?
Yeah, definitely. Because it's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember.
I mean, which parts do you miss? Do you miss the idea that it is God, or do you miss the support system that a religious community provided?
Well, I wasn't really involved so much in a religious community, at least not for the last 10 years or so. So for me, it was that quote-unquote relationship. And, the music that I would listen to that felt so encouraging, and the spiritual teachers I'd listen to that would kind of help me walk through some of the things that I was struggling with.
Holly, knowing that it's not true or there's no reason to believe it,
right?
Does that diminish the power of returning to prayers to God, these religious exercises?
Definitely. Right, yeah, well, because I know now that, when I was praying to God, really all I was doing was talking to myself.
So if we are no longer then relying on a supernatural exercise, we don't believe in, this other out there, this invisible father figure, prime mover, whatever. What do you think as human beings we then rely on in times of crisis and need, when we need support? How would you fill in that blank at this point in your life, if you can?
Well, definitely myself, because I think that we as human beings, are a lot more, I think we're a lot more powerful than we give ourselves credit for. But, beyond that, looking for, folks who kind of see the world the way we do. My husband is an atheist, fortunately, so he gets to hear a lot of what I have to say. And we just actually moved to the location we're at now. We're about 150 miles away from where I grew up, and so we're still trying to build a community down here, which is challenging as you get older. But that would be something else, look for, folks who are of like mind. I've been listening to your show for, about 6 months and, listening to the stories of, other folks who are kind of going through similar situations has helped as well. It's quite cathartic, to know, oh, okay, I'm not the only one who's going through this.
Do you think that music needs to be about supernatural things to inspire and move us?
No.
Appreciating the songs as musical pieces on their own merits without necessarily having to buy into lyrics about magic and all those types of things. You can still be moved and inspired and really feel that sense of goodness and awe.
Mm-hmm. Right.
When you look at the church, in the church, I look at so much of what the church does so well. And I ask, if we removed the supernatural aspect, right, all the magical thinking from it, would it still have power? And I think this explains the power of and the draw of church communities. We come together, we are greeted, we are missed. People often bring us coffee. There's a place for our kids to go. There's a sense of purpose. We believe we are there to be better ourselves and to help make the world better. There is communal music. There is a sense of family. There is also a lot of human connection, physical touch, the hugs, the handshakes, the laughter, those moments when we are down and we can talk to somebody, cry on their shoulders. The church is really, really good at this. The thing is that I see all of these as human exercises, and all of the God speak is just window dressing, right? We don't need to lie to ourselves about the supernatural to have all the good stuff that human beings do. And so, much of what you're missing, I think, from your faith may be linked directly to a God belief. But I think much of it may be that you simply miss the idea of belonging. Now, don't let me project too much onto you, but do you miss belonging in that way?
Well, I'm definitely very extroverted. So I think you might be pretty spot on with that. Definitely.
Okay, so here you are, and you've caught the atheist quote-unquote movement at a weird time. Because we are growing exponentially. Statistically, we see the rise of the nuns or the non-religious in this country is really on the rise. People under the age of 30 are walking away from the church in droves. They don't need it. And at the same time, we as atheists are like, fine, we've defined what we don't believe in, gods, but what do we believe in? And we are struggling as a movement with community. And I think it's because so often we've allowed the church to get away with the lie that all community is religious, and coming together to enjoy the good stuff is somehow church or religious. And I just think that's crazy. And so it's a little bit of a struggle because I, like you, crave community. I crave support. I crave human connection. I want to be there for others, and I want them to be there for me, and I want to share life's experience, the human experience. And when you leave the church, it's like you're starting at square one. And the atheist movement is in these times of growing pains. How do we do community? Do we do community in a model that looks like the church, where we get together once a week or 3 times a week with special music and, inspirational speakers? Do we do something else? There are people who are atheists who are so averse to getting together in any way that they'll just opt out at the front end. It's an odd time for atheists, the culture of non-believers here in the United States, at least. But I would encourage you to perhaps do what I did, Holly, and it sounds a little bit like a cop-out, but if there's not a local free thought group in your city, to create that community or connect to that community online. I'm in Jesustown, Oklahoma, right? It's 2007, 2008. I realize I'm an atheist. I look around and I'm like, I am surrounded with religiosity. No one here gets me. And it was via the internet that I found much of the support that I so desperately needed. I don't know if that's even remotely fulfilling to someone like you, if you are a person who craves personal connections. Would that be a valid place to start, or what do you think?
Well, I mean, I definitely have found a couple of Facebook groups for basically like ex-Christians or recovering Christians. And, that's been helpful to a certain extent. But, I think, like you said, having that like in-person community is really important to me, and it's something that I should spend some more time pursuing.
Well, I don't want to out you, like where you live and have you like, oh, Holly's coming to your event in city X tomorrow. I don't want to do that. But here off the air, I think I'm going to ask you where you live, if it's okay. And I will personally see if there's a way that I can connect with a free thought group. I'm not forcing you to go. I'm not saying you need to go. But if there's a group of people who get you, who accept you, who will open their arms and be there for you and allow you to sort of rebuild that platform of family and community in your own circle, that might be a place to start if that's appealing to you.
Definitely. It definitely is, I think. I think you're like, you hit the nail on the head.
I know people.
So.
Like, I know people. I will have my people call their people, call your people, is what I'm saying. You know, this is a process. You are not going to get there tomorrow, Holly. You're not going to get there likely next week. But I think just one day at a time, one step at a time. And whenever you need us, the Thinking Atheist community, I know, will be here for you. All you got to do is raise your hand or go tap on the comment sections or just drop me an email and we'll make something happen for you. Okay?
I appreciate that.
All right, Holly. Well, I mean, beyond that, I mean, would you go back? If someone said, look, which pill do you take to go back to the Matrix? I always ask this question. Is it the red pill or the blue pill? Whatever that pill is to go back to the faith, to be blindly ignorant of everything that you know now. Would you do it?
Nope.
You sure?
No way. Well, I mean, you know, aside from the fact that I am feeling alienated at this point, I also feel ridiculously free. When I said I don't believe in God out loud for the first time in my life, I think it was the most freeing thing I'd ever said. Like goosebumps, big smile came on my face, and I knew that I was home.
Well, Holly, you are among friends. I don't mean that in a saccharine way. I mean that with absolute sincerity. You are among friends. If you'll hang on, I'm going to find out kind of geographically where our starting point is, and I'm going to see if I can find a local chapter of a free thought group that you can reach out to, and maybe you'll make some new friends, okay?
Sounds great.
All right, hang on just a second.
Okay.
Awesome. Let me make this connection real quick. I will be right back with more of your calls right after this. Thanks so much for supporting this broadcast. You get the show 2 days early and commercial free when you're a patron. So become a patron at patreon.com/Seth Andrews. I'm going to Denver, Colorado, July the 27th, a one-day conference with a whole bunch of stuff scheduled for the day. And then I'll be speaking that evening. That's Denver, July 27th. Looks like I'm going to Lincoln, Nebraska, mid-August. Details still coming in on that. First weekend of November, I'm going to be at the Florida Free Thought Convention. And then Matt Dillahunty and I are teaming up for a Phoenix event on the weekend of November 9th of this year. And all the details are at sethandrews.net/events. And as I get the details in, the venues, the start times, if there are tickets, all those things, they will be added just as soon as I get them. But I don't have all the details on everything yet. So sethandrews.net/events. As we go back to the switchboard and take more of your calls. 217, you're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who's this?
This is Paul.
Paul, what's going on?
Hey, I'm just here to kind of represent, I guess, the use of the atheist movement.
I love it.
I guess, yeah, I'm just kind of struggling coming into this culture. I find a lot of struggle trying to make it clear to my new or lack of faith, I suppose.
Okay, well, let me make sure I understand. I mean, what'd you come out of, man?
So my growing up, I didn't have a lot of background, but recently my family has started to devote themselves more to church every Sunday and hardcore Christian, and my mother's a strong pro-life, and I feel like I just have a much more modern take than the entirety of my family.
How old are you?
I'm 16.
Okay. So, I mean, what's your end game? Do you want to kind of just play it cool until you graduate and get out, or do you want to have the conversation with them, or what?
I think I'm just going to hold off, but I'm struggling like it's been mentioned once or twice, but I feel like sometimes just with the word choice I use, sometimes like I still find myself saying things like, "Oh my God," or like playing devil's advocate, and so it kind of seems like it's just rebellion.
Let me start with, oh my God. The people who get hung up on, hell, I say, oh my God. There's no reason to get caught up on all that stuff. They're figures of speech. Just let it go. You know, if you say, oh my God, it doesn't mean you believe in God. They're expressions. Don't let labels hang you up. Are you atheist? Are you agnostic? Agnostics are atheists. Are you a doubter? Are you this? Are you that? Are you a theist? Deist? I mean, sometimes labels do help us define things. But mostly, I think, just make it about you and your journey. You know, it's a life of discovery. Approach the day honestly. And if something new pops up tomorrow that makes sense and is supported by the evidence, we're prepared to go that direction. Make sure your journey's about you. All right? It's not about trying to convince them as much as it is about trying to live a life that is true to you. So it's up to you. You can decide if you want to tell them, how you want to tell them, how much you want to tell them, how you want to live your own life, how you frame your own goals and dreams and pursuits. You get to be you on your terms. And I think that would be my hope and dream for you. Okay.
All right.
Whoever you are, let's do that. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. That really helps a lot. I guess I just having those conversations kind of, especially when like younger siblings or something, just approach it as if it's the truth and just not knowing how to respond to something like that.
You're likely not going to change their minds. And I'll tell you something else.
No,
You're probably not going to change their minds with facts. So if it does come up, I would use the words, not that I am an atheist, but I've looked at it and I'm just not convinced. Have them explain it to you. Well, tell me about this. Well, how did you get to that conclusion? Leave the burden of proof upon them. And that way the pressure's off of you. And yeah, they're going to react and flip out a little bit, but at the same time, they're going to possibly for the first time in their lives have to qualify what they've been claiming as truth with a capital T. And who knows, it might even plant the seeds of doubt in the back of their own mind, and they'll have their own epiphany 5-10 years down the way. So questions are very useful, but ultimately just make sure that you're not trying to change them. You're just trying to live your own life. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. Appreciate you, brother. Take care of yourself.
You too.
508. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who's this?
Hey, Seth. My name is Andy. How are you?
I'm well, Andy. What's going on? What's on your mind?
I have to hear me out, because it's going to sound bad at first, and then you're going to go, okay, I get it, because we're on the same team. I have to thank Donald Trump for what he is doing to destroy Christianity in the United States of America. And this is why I am watching as people I served in the military with, who are true patriots, and Christians, especially young adult Christians, the millennials, the zennials, who are watching Donald Trump and jumping into bed with the big business of Christianity, whether it's, losing my mind here, president of Liberty University.
Yeah, Falwell.
Who's that, Falwell Jr.?
Yeah.
Falwell Jr. Watching him jump into bed with Falwell Jr., watching him jump into bed with the Copelands and all this other stuff. Rah, 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 all the faux patriotism, if you're not with us, you're against us. And people now, especially the younger folks, are watching it and going, that's not what I believe in. If you represent what this is supposed to be, I'm out. And I'm watching as a lot of my friends are realizing just how dirty the Christian world is as far as the faux patriotism, the big business, and just I won't say that they're leaving, but they're moderating, or they're heading to the left. They're heading to the very soft, liberal, left-wing kind of Unitarian, liberal type of Christianity that I don't have as many issues with. Have you seen the same, or am I just out of my mind?
Yeah, I mean, I totally get what you mean. Watching Franklin Graham declare June the 2nd, a day of prayer for our president, rallying people. And it makes no sense that he would require our prayers, because Franklin Graham also believes that Trump is a product of divine destiny. And watching the Franklin Grahams of the world rally around a man who is the antithesis of the best teachings of Jesus. Like if we were to remove all the other stuff and we took the best incarnation of Christ out of the Bible, those verses, and you were to then look up the antithesis of what that is, you would see a photograph of Donald Trump. And to watch the evangelicals sell their own souls, so to speak, it's revealed, it's exposed the dirty, nasty underbelly of the evangelical right. And you'll see a core group of people remain at his side as they have, regardless. And the rest of them are like, hey, wait a minute. These people are massive hypocrites. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I know a few Catholics who normally they are not in the exact same boat, at least in my experience, as the Protestant evangelicals. Watching them suck pup to Donald Trump, I'm like, I already knew that you were morally devoid because of the whole Catholic priest sex abuse thing. And you're already not capable of giving any moral advice. And I don't trust anybody who thinks that the Catholic Church is anything more than a crime syndicate that should be shut down and, prosecuted. But when you go and you realize that there are these people who are suck pupping to Donald Trump, but then you have, again, the antithesis of these, people waking up and going, wait, no, not at all. No. That's not what I believe. He doesn't represent any of my values. And I love the number of times that I have had, the discussions on Facebook and actually one time in person where I actually, for a Christian, played off of YouTube the clip of grab him by the pussy. And I'm like, those are the values? That's your boy?
I sent that graphic to my father, who's a huge Trumper. He believes that Donald Trump is divine destiny. And so I sent the graphic to my dad, and he honestly acted as if it did not exist. He wouldn't respond to it. He wouldn't speak to it. He wouldn't address it. He just kept going on whatever narrative he was going. It's a blind spot, a willful blind spot. It was an Aaron Ra who said, ignorance is not just what you don't know, it's what you won't know. And that's more than ignorance. I think it's denial, a betrayal of the truth.
Yeah, and when you consider and here's the thing, it's not necessarily the reality, but that romanticized version of what America is and what America was to folks on the conservative right. The tame the West, fought and won 2 world wars, all the grandiose positive stuff that we think about, to cower like that instead of facing the evilness of that man and to instead cower away from it just goes to prove just a little bit more hypocrisy for the conservative right wing. I've noticed it and I've seen it and I've had enough of it myself. The one thing I do see in the atheist community is that people, instead of calmly just keep calmly and consistently pointing to these examples. People are noticing it and listening to it. They are realizing and waking up to just how evil their religiosity is, especially now that Donald Trump is bringing it front and center. When we get angry, when we give up that higher ground, we start losing. And we've got plenty of good, positive examples. Just keep pointing it out, folks. Just keep giving those examples. Keep playing the clip of him bragging about grabbing a woman, as such.
Yeah.
And look at people and say, is this your boy? Is this him? And people, they're running out of excuses. So I got a quick question for you, Seth. Any chance, 2 quick questions. 1, any chance that we're going to see you up here in the greater New England area? And then 2, I know that you have your disagreements with Dave Rubin, but is there any chance of us seeing you on either Dave Rubin or the Joe Rogan Experience? Because I would love to see you and him get high and go in and talk about shit for 3 hours.
Well, I mean, I talked to Rubin. I talked to Joe. Mostly it's a question of being invited. A couple of years ago, I'd expressed, I had a very short exchange with Rubin saying, hey, look, if you want to have a dialogue, I'd be up for that. And he was interested, and then he disappeared. And I've never met Joe Rogan. He's a big fish. I'm the C team. So, I mean, I'd love a chance to sit down and have a conversation. I'll talk to almost anybody. New England thing, and normally I go where I'm invited. So if there's a free thought group in the New England area that wants to put together a tour stop, just have them drop me an email, Seth@thethinkingatheist.com. I think it'd be fantastic. Seth@thethinkingatheist.com. See if anybody's interested, okay?
All right, we'll do. Hey, you keep doing what you're doing. Believe it or not, your show in the community that you developed actually saved my life a few years ago from suicide. So
Jesus,
one of these days I'm going to have to meet you. I have to.
I want to meet you. I'll whatever. I don't know what I'm buying, but I'm buying. Okay, let's make that happen.
All right, first round's on me. You got the second.
Thanks,
Anyways,
brother.
keep doing what you're doing, Seth. I appreciate you, brother. Bye bye.
Right, thank you. I enjoy being able to spend this time with you so much. Thank you for listening. Thanks for supporting the broadcast. Thanks for being a part of this community. It's really making a difference. As we've heard in the show today, it's there for people when they need it. And, it's been 10 years and we're still kicking. So thank you so much. I'll see you back here next time. Have a wonderful week.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.